The wrench slipped again, and Sam Rivers cursed under his breath as his knuckles scraped against the rough metal pipe. Around him, the other workers at Mining Colony 7 watched with barely hidden amusement. The tall bird-like avians ruffled their feathers in what passed for laughter among their species, while the reptilian scalers hissed softly in their own version of chuckling. Perhaps the human would benefit from proper tools, chirped Trill, the lead avian engineer. Her voice carried that particular tone of condescension that Sam had grown used to over his 3 years on Kepler 9. We have molecular welders that could repair that coolant line in seconds. Sam wiped the grease from his hands on his already dirty coveralls and picked up his trusty adjustable wrench again. The thing was older than most of the aliens working here, passed down from his grandfather who had worked the oil rigs back on Earth. Its metal surface was worn smooth from decades of use, and it had never failed him yet. "This works just fine," Sam replied, his voice calm despite the growing frustration. He was a stocky man in his 50s, with gray streaking through his brown hair and laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of better times. His hands were permanently stained with engine oil and hydraulic fluid, marks of someone who fixed things the old-fashioned way. The scalar foreman, a large creature named Ridge whose scales shimmered green in the artificial light, slithered closer. "Human stubbornness is well documented," he said, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "But surely even your species can appreciate efficiency." Sam tightened the pipe joint with 3 precise turns of his wrench, then tested the seal by hand. Perfect. No leaks. No stress fractures, and it would last for years. He had seen the fancy molecular repairs fail within months when the equipment was pushed hard. His fixes endured. "Efficiency is getting the job done right the first time," Sam said, packing his tools back into his worn leather tool bag, "not using expensive gadgets that break down when you need them most." The comment drew more amused sounds from the gathered workers. The hive minds, insectoid creatures that shared a collective consciousness, buzzed in unison, their equivalent of rolling their eyes. To them, Sam represented everything backward about individual thinking species. They could coordinate repairs across multiple sites simultaneously using their shared mental link, while this human fumbled with primitive metal tools. Colony Administrator Beth Adams approached the group, her crisp uniform a stark contrast to Sam's oil-stained work clothes. She was human too, but she had embraced the high-tech approach that dominated galactic civilization. Her personal assistant device floated beside her, recording everything for later analysis. "Rivers, I need you to look at the main ventilation system," she said, consulting the holographic display projected by her device. "The atmospheric processors are showing minor inefficiencies." "What kind of inefficiencies?" Sam asked, already mentally running through the possibilities. 0.03% deviation from optimal, Beth replied. The avian technicians ran a full diagnostic, but their equipment shows all systems functioning within normal parameters. Trill preened her silver feathers smugly. "Our scanners detect no mechanical faults. Perhaps the deviation is simply acceptable variance." Sam shook his head. 0.03% adds up over time. If the system is working harder than it should, something is causing drag somewhere. Could be dust buildup, could be a bearing going bad, could be a dozen things. The scanners would detect such problems, Ridge insisted. "Your human intuition is unreliable compared to precise measurement." "My human intuition has kept this colony running for 3 years, Sam replied mildly. He shouldered his tool bag and headed toward the ventilation access. "I'll take a look." The other workers dispersed, returning to their various tasks with the satisfied air of people who had just witnessed their daily entertainment. Sam had become something of a running joke among the alien workers. They called him the Badger behind his back, though some had started using the nickname to his face. It was meant to be mocking, a reference to his stocky build and his stubborn insistence on using primitive methods. Sam didn't mind the nickname. He had learned about honey badgers in school, back when Earth still had them in the wild. Small, tough creatures that never backed down from a fight. There were worse things to be compared to. The ventilation shaft was a tight fit, even for someone of Sam's modest height. He crawled through the metal ductwork with a penlight clenched between his teeth, feeling his way along the smooth surfaces. His hands told him things that no scanner could detect, the subtle vibrations that indicated wear, the slight temperature differences that suggested airflow problems, the almost imperceptible roughness that preceded major failures. 20 minutes in, he found it. A support strut had shifted slightly, probably during the last seismic tremor that shook the colony. The movement was tiny, maybe a quarter inch, but it was causing one of the main air circulation fans to work at an odd angle. The fan was compensating automatically, but the extra effort was causing the efficiency loss Beth had detected. Sam pulled out his wrench and a small crowbar, wedging the strut back into proper alignment. He secured it with wire and metal brackets from his kit, creating a repair that would hold through anything short of a major earthquake. The work took him 40 minutes, and by the time he emerged from the access panel, his coveralls were covered in dust and his knees ached from crawling. Beth was waiting for him with her floating assistant, along with Trill and Ridge. They watched expectantly as Sam brushed the dust from his clothes. "Well?" Beth asked. "Support strut shifted during the last tremor," Sam reported. "Fan number 7 was working at a bad angle. Should be running smooth now." Beth consulted her device and her eyebrows rose. "Atmospheric efficiency is back to optimal." "How did you know where to look?" "Felt it," Sam said simply. The vibration was wrong. Ridge's scales rippled in skeptical patterns. "You diagnosed a complex mechanical issue by feeling vibrations?" "Same way you can tell when someone is lying by tasting their scent," Sam replied. "Experience." Trill ruffled her feathers dismissively. "Primitive methods producing accidental success. Your human superstitions about mechanical intuition are not scientifically valid." Sam just smiled and headed back toward the maintenance bay. Let them think what they wanted. He had work to do, and the colony's systems needed someone who understood that the most important tool was not in any kit or scanner. It was the willingness to get your hands dirty and pay attention to what the machines were trying to tell you. Behind him, the aliens continued their discussion about human peculiarities, their voices fading as he walked away. Sam Rivers, the Badger, went back to his simple tools and complex problems, unaware that both would soon be tested in ways he had never imagined. The emergency alarm cut through the morning shift like a blade, its harsh tone echoing off the metal walls of Mining Colony 7. Sam looked up from the hydraulic pump he was rebuilding, oil-stained hands still gripping his wrench. In 3 years on Kepler 9, he had heard that particular alarm only twice before, and both times it had meant someone was dead. Beth Adams burst into the maintenance bay, her face pale and her usual composure cracked. Behind her came Dan Cole, the colony's security chief, a former military man whose scarred face rarely showed emotion. Today, worry lines creased his features. "We have a problem," Beth said without preamble. 3 miners didn't report back from the deep shafts last night. Scalers from Ridge's crew. Sam set down his wrench and gave them his full attention. The scalers were tough, experienced miners who knew the tunnels better than anyone. They didn't just disappear. "Equipment failure?" Sam asked.
"Cave-in?"
Dan shook his head. "No structural damage detected. Their personal beacons went dark simultaneously at 2300 hours. No distress signals, no communication attempts. Could be interference from the mineral deposits," Beth suggested, but her tone indicated she didn't believe it herself. "Not all 3 at once," Dan replied grimly. "And there's something else." He activated his portable display unit, showing grainy footage from a tunnel security camera. The image was dark, lit only by the miners' helmet lights as 3 scalar workers made their way deeper into the shaft. Everything appeared normal until the timestamp showed 22:58. Then the lights began to flicker and dance erratically. "Watch carefully," Dan said, pointing at the edge of the camera's field of view. Sam squinted at the screen, then sucked in a sharp breath. Something moved in the darkness beyond the lights, something that seemed to absorb the illumination rather than reflect it. It was there for less than a second before the camera feed cut to static. "What was that?" Beth whispered. "I don't know," Dan admitted, "but I'm organizing search teams. The avians will scout from above using their aerial capabilities, and the hive minds can coordinate multiple search patterns simultaneously." Sam frowned, thinking through the problem. The avians can't fly in those narrow tunnels, and their vision is adapted for bright light. They'll be nearly blind down there. As for the hive minds, if something is jamming communications, their shared consciousness won't work underground. "What are you suggesting?" Beth asked. "Let me go down there," Sam said simply. "I know those tunnels as well as anyone, and I don't rely on fancy equipment that can be disrupted." Dan and Beth exchanged glances. The security chief spoke first. "Rivers, I appreciate the offer, but this could be dangerous. We should send trained search personnel. Your trained search personnel are adapted for conditions that don't exist down there, Sam pointed out. The scalers have heat vision, but you said their beacons went dark. That suggests whatever got them doesn't produce heat signatures. The avians need light and open space. The hive minds need clear communication channels. I need a flashlight and my wits. Beth consulted her floating assistant device, its holographic display showing colony personnel records. Sam, your file shows no formal search and rescue training. My file doesn't show a lot of things, Sam replied, shouldering his tool bag and adding a few additional items, rope, flares, and a first aid kit. But I've been crawling through dark, dangerous places fixing things since before most of these aliens ever left their home worlds. An hour later, Sam descended into the mining complex's deepest level. The elevator ride took him nearly a kilometer below the surface, past layers of extracted ore, and into the network of tunnels that honeycombed Kepler-9's crust. The air grew cooler and more humid as he descended, carrying the metallic taste of deep earth. The tunnel where the scalers had vanished stretched ahead of him like a throat, its walls lined with the smooth marks of industrial boring equipment. Sam's flashlight beam probed the darkness, revealing nothing unusual at first glance. But as he walked deeper, his experienced eye began to notice details that sophisticated scanners would miss. The dust patterns were wrong. In a tunnel that should show only the track marks of mining equipment, there were other disturbances. Long parallel scratches in the floor that suggested something large had been dragged, scuff marks on the walls at odd heights, and strangest of all, areas where the perpetual layer of mineral dust had been completely cleared away, as if something had absorbed it entirely. Sam knelt beside one of the scratch marks, running his fingers along its edge. The gouge was deep and sharp, made by something harder than the scaler's natural claws. He pulled out a small magnifying glass and examined the mark more closely in his flashlight beam. "What the hell," he muttered, seeing microscopic metal filings embedded in the rock. Whatever had made these marks was not organic. A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel, a soft scraping like metal on stone. Sam killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the tunnel wall, listening intently. The sound came again, closer now, accompanied by something that might have been breathing if it wasn't so utterly wrong. It was too rhythmic, too mechanical, like air being processed through filters rather than lungs. Sam waited in the darkness, every sense straining. His grandfather had taught him to hunt in the deep woods of Alaska, lessons about patience and observation that served him well in his engineering career. Right now, those old skills might be the only thing keeping him alive. The sounds moved past his position, heading toward the colony's upper levels. Sam counted to 60 before turning his light back on, keeping the beam low and shielded with his hand. Whatever these things were, they were heading in the wrong direction for mere predators. They were moving toward populated areas. He found the first evidence of the missing scalers 50 meters deeper into the tunnel. Ridge's nephew, a young miner named Chip, had left his helmet behind. The device was intact but bore strange marks, smooth, circular depressions that looked almost like bite marks, except no animal Sam knew had perfectly round teeth. The helmet's recording device was still functional. Sam accessed the stored footage, watching the final minutes of Chip's shift through the miner's own eyes. The recording showed normal work until the very end when the camera began to shake violently. In the last few frames before the feed cut out, Sam caught a glimpse of something impossible. The things in the tunnel were not animals. They moved with mechanical precision, their surfaces reflecting light in ways that suggested metal rather than flesh. But they displayed hunting behaviors, pack coordination, and what appeared to be intelligence. They had deliberately disabled the miner's equipment before striking, cutting off communications and eliminating light sources with surgical precision. Sam made his way back to the surface as quickly as caution allowed, his mind racing through the implications. The colony's defenders were preparing for the wrong kind of threat. The avians' aerial scouts were useless against underground predators. The scalers' heat vision wouldn't detect creatures that appeared to be largely mechanical. The hive mind's coordination advantages meant nothing if their targets could jam communications. When the elevator reached the surface level, Sam found Beth and Dan waiting anxiously in the control room. "What did you find?" Beth asked immediately. Sam set Chip's helmet on the desk and activated its recording playback. "We're not dealing with animals," he said grimly. "These things are intelligent, organized, and they're learning our patterns. This wasn't a random attack. It was a reconnaissance mission. Dan studied the footage, his military experience evident in how quickly he grasped the tactical implications. "You're saying they're scouts. I'm saying they're preparing for something bigger," Sam replied. "And our current defenses are designed for the wrong kind of enemy." Beth looked between them, her administrative mind struggling to process the threat assessment. "What do you recommend?" Sam thought about the scratch marks, the deliberate way the creatures had disabled equipment, and the direction they had been moving when he heard them in the tunnels. "I recommend we stop thinking like civilized beings and start thinking like prey," he said, "because that's what we are until we figure out how to fight these things on their own terms." Sam's boots clanged against the metal grating as he climbed down into the colony's main power distribution center. His flashlight beam swept across banks of humming machinery, revealing something that made his blood run cold. The thick power cables that fed electricity to the upper levels had been gnawed, not cut cleanly like sabotage, but chewed with systematic precision, leaving just enough intact to maintain power flow, while creating critical weak points. He had spent the last week mapping the creature's movements through the underground sections of Mining Colony 7, following scratches, disturbed dust patterns, and the increasingly frequent equipment failures that others attributed to normal wear. What he found painted a picture that no one wanted to believe. The things in the tunnels were not random predators. They were engineers. Sam photographed the damaged cables with his personal device, adding them to the growing collection of evidence he had gathered. Ventilation ducts with precision holes drilled at stress points, support beams scored in patterns that would cause maximum structural failure under load, communication lines severed in ways that would create dead zones in the most critical areas. Every piece of damage was carefully calculated to remain undetected by automated systems while preparing the colony for systematic collapse. These creatures understood infrastructure better than most of the alien engineers working above ground. The elevator ride to the surface gave Sam time to organize his thoughts. He had requested a meeting with the colony's leadership council, comprising representatives from each species working the mining operation. What he needed to tell them would sound like paranoid fantasy to beings who trusted their advanced technology above all else. The council chamber buzzed with conversation in multiple languages as Sam entered. Beth Adams sat at the head of the polished metal table, flanked by Dan Cole and the department heads from each species. Trill represented the avians, her silver feathers gleaming under the artificial lights. Ridge spoke for the scalers, his massive frame coiled in the specially designed chair. The hive minds had sent 3 representatives who stood perfectly synchronized, their insectoid heads tilted at identical angles. "Thank you all for coming," Beth began formally. "Sam has requested this meeting to present findings from his investigation into the recent disappearances." "Sam?" Sam stood and activated the room's holographic display, showing his collected evidence, photos of the damaged infrastructure, recordings of strange sounds in the tunnels, and seismic data that showed movement patterns too regular to be natural. "Over the past week, I've mapped deliberate damage to our critical systems," Sam began. "Power distribution, communications, structural supports, ventilation. Every system has been compromised in ways designed to cause cascading failures." Trill's feathers ruffled dismissively. "You are suggesting that primitive tunnel creatures possess engineering knowledge?" "I'm suggesting that these creatures are not primitive," Sam replied. "They understand our technology better than we understand theirs." Ridge's forked tongue flicked out to taste the air, a sign of skepticism among his species. "Our sensors detect no organized presence in the lower tunnels. Random damage from scavenging animals is not evidence of intelligence." Sam highlighted one of his photographs, showing the precisely gnawed power cables. "This isn't random. Look at the pattern. They left exactly enough connectivity to maintain power flow, while creating maximum instability. That requires understanding of electrical load distribution." One of the hive mind representatives spoke, its voice a harmony of perfectly synchronized tones. "Individual perception often creates patterns where none exist. Collective analysis reveals no systematic threat. Your collective analysis is based on sensors that these things know how to avoid," Sam countered. "They've been studying us for weeks, maybe months. They know exactly what our equipment can and cannot detect." Beth consulted her floating assistant device, its holographic display showing colony status reports. "Our defensive systems show green across all sectors. Automated security protocols detect no unauthorized presence. Sam pulled up the seismic data, showing the regular movement patterns he had tracked, because they're moving through areas our security doesn't monitor. Maintenance shafts, abandoned mining tunnels, natural cave systems that intersect with our excavations. They're using our own infrastructure against us. Dan Cole, the security chief, leaned forward with interest. His military background made him more receptive to unconventional threat assessments. What kind of numbers are we talking about? Based on the scope of the damage and the coordination required, I estimate hundreds, Sam replied. Maybe thousands. They're not just hiding from us, they're preparing for something big. The room erupted in skeptical chatter. Trill's wings spread in the avian gesture of dismissal. Hundreds of undetected creatures living beneath a surveyed mining colony? Impossible. Our mining operations have excavated these areas extensively, Ridge added. We would have encountered any significant population. Sam felt frustration building in his chest. We encountered 3 of them. They killed 3 experienced scalar miners and made it look like an equipment failure. How many more disappearances are we going to write off as accidents? Beth raised her hand for silence. Sam, I appreciate your diligence, but we need to consider the practical implications. You're asking us to allocate significant resources to defend against a threat that our technology cannot confirm exists. I'm asking you to prepare for the possibility that our technology isn't sufficient, Sam replied. These things have been studying our weaknesses for weeks. When they attack, it won't be a random assault. It will be coordinated, systematic, and designed to exploit every vulnerability they've identified. The HiveMind representatives conferred briefly in their rapid, harmonic language before one spoke. Collective security protocols are designed to detect and respond to all known threat types. Individual human intuition is not a reliable basis for defensive strategy. Sam looked around the table at faces that ranged from polite skepticism to open dismissal. Only Dan showed any signs of taking the threat seriously, but even the security chief seemed hesitant to commit resources based on one human's suspicions. What about the missing miners? Sam asked. 3 experienced workers don't just vanish. Industrial accidents occur, Ridge replied matter-of-factly. Mining is dangerous work. Their remains will likely be found during routine excavation. Their equipment was selectively disabled before they disappeared, Sam pressed. That doesn't happen in accidents. Equipment failures can cascade rapidly in dangerous environments, Trill observed. Human tendency toward conspiracy thinking is well documented. Sam realized he was fighting a losing battle. The alien leadership had too much faith in their technology and too little respect for human instincts. They would not take action based on what they saw as primitive superstition. Fine, Sam said, gathering his evidence files. But I want my concerns on record. When this goes bad, and it will go bad, I want everyone to remember that we had warning. Beth nodded diplomatically. Your concerns are noted in the official minutes. Is there anything else? Sam looked around the table one more time, seeing the same mixture of condescension and dismissal he had grown accustomed to over his years on the colony. Just one thing. When these creatures attack, your advanced technology won't save you. Your scanners can't detect them. Your communication systems can be jammed, and your automated defenses are designed for threats that follow the rules. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. The only thing standing between this colony and disaster is someone willing to get their hands dirty and fight these things on their own terms. I hope you remember that when the time comes. After Sam left, the council continued their meeting, moving on to routine administrative matters. They filed his report in the database alongside other security concerns and marked it for follow-up review in 30 days. The automated systems continued their steady monitoring, detecting nothing unusual in the tunnels below. Meanwhile, Sam returned to his workshop and began preparing for war. If the leadership wouldn't authorize defensive preparations, he would make them himself. He pulled out hand-drawn schematics of the colony's infrastructure and began marking critical points that needed protection. His tool collection expanded to include items that had nothing to do with maintenance and everything to do with survival. In the tunnels beneath the colony, the creatures Sam called engineers continued their methodical preparation. They had indeed been studying the settlement's weaknesses, and their analysis was nearly complete. Soon, very soon, they would test their knowledge against the reality of Mining Colony 7's defenses. The countdown to catastrophe had begun, and only one human understood what was coming. The ground beneath Sam's feet trembled like a living thing as he worked to secure the last of his improvised barriers across the main tunnel entrance. 3 weeks had passed since the council meeting, 3 weeks of ignored warnings and careful preparation. The seismic sensors had been registering increasing activity for days, but the colony's geological team attributed it to natural settling in the excavated areas. Sam knew better. The vibrations had a rhythm, a purpose that spoke of coordinated movement deep below. Thousands of creatures were on the move, and they were heading upward. He had used his maintenance access to quietly reinforce critical areas throughout the colony. Steel plates welded across vulnerable ventilation shafts, emergency blast doors rewired to respond to manual triggers instead of automated systems, fuel lines rerouted away from the most obvious attack vectors. Everything done during routine maintenance shifts when the alien workers paid no attention to the humans' primitive methods. The attack began at 347 hours, just before the morning shift change when the colony was at its most vulnerable. Sam was in the power distribution center, checking his hidden backup systems when the lights flickered and died. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red warning light. Then the screaming started. Sam grabbed his equipment bag and ran toward the elevator, but the car was locked down due to the power fluctuations. He took the emergency stairs 3 at a time, his aging legs protesting the sudden exertion. The stairwell echoed with sounds that made his blood freeze. The ring of metal on metal, inhuman voices raised in what might have been battle cries, and the wet sounds that meant people were dying. He emerged onto the main level to find chaos. The creatures he had been tracking for weeks had erupted from multiple access points simultaneously, pouring into the colony's central areas like a black tide. In the red emergency lighting, they looked even more nightmarish than he had imagined. They moved on 6 legs each, their bodies a disturbing blend of organic curves and mechanical angles. Metallic carapaces gleamed with an oily sheen, while exposed organic parts pulsed with internal light. Each creature was roughly the size of a large dog, but they moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit. The colony's defenders were in complete disarray. The avians, designed for aerial combat in open spaces, found themselves trapped in narrow corridors where their wings were useless. Their high-tech plasma weapons required clear lines of sight and sophisticated targeting systems that couldn't lock onto the creature's bizarre biomechanical signatures. The scalar's natural advantages were equally compromised. Their heat vision showed the creatures as strange cold spots with small hot zones, making targeting impossible. Their own advanced energy weapons kept missing or failing to penetrate the creature's adaptive armor. The hive minds faced the worst situation of all. Something about the creature's presence disrupted their shared consciousness, leaving the individuals isolated and confused. They stumbled around the corridors, calling out in distress as their collective identity fragmented. Sam watched a group of avian guards try to establish a defensive position near the communication center. Their plasma rifles charged with high-pitched whines, sophisticated targeting computers analyzing the approaching threats. The creatures responded by doing something impossible. They began to shift and change, their biomechanical forms adapting in real time to deflect the energy weapons. "The targeting systems can't lock on," one of the avians shrieked. "They're changing faster than our computers can compensate." Sam pulled out his grandfather's hunting rifle, a primitive weapon that used chemical propellants to fire simple metal projectiles. The creatures might be able to adapt to energy weapons and sophisticated targeting systems, but they couldn't adapt to a chunk of lead moving at high velocity. He took careful aim and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's sharp crack echoed through the corridor as one of the creatures tumbled backward, its biomechanical form sparking and twitching. The others turned toward him with what appeared to be surprise, as if they had never encountered anything so simple and brutal. "Fall back to secondary positions," Sam shouted to the avian guards. "Use the manual override corridors. We cannot abandon our posts," Trill replied, her silver feathers now streaked with some kind of dark fluid. "Protocol requires us to maintain defensive formations." "Your protocol is getting you killed," Sam snapped, firing again and dropping another creature. "These things have studied your protocols. They know exactly how you're going to respond." More creatures poured through the access points, moving with terrifying coordination. They had indeed studied the colony's layout extensively, striking at every critical system simultaneously. The main power grid, the communication array, the atmospheric processing plant, and the water treatment facility all came under attack at the same moment. Sam watched the colony's sophisticated defenses crumble in real time. Automated security turrets swept back and forth uselessly, their sensors unable to distinguish between the creatures and the chaotic mix of energy signatures from damaged equipment. When they did manage to target something, their energy beams either missed the rapidly adapting creatures or struck colonists by mistake. The defensive force, fields that should have sealed off critical areas, flickered and failed as the creatures systematically destroyed their control nodes. Sam realized with growing horror that every defensive measure had been anticipated and countered. The creatures had spent weeks learning the colony's every weakness, and now they were exploiting that knowledge with ruthless efficiency. Beth Adams stumbled through the corridor, her pristine administrator's uniform torn and stained. Her floating assistant device sparked and died as she approached Sam's position. "The main computer core is under attack," she gasped. "They're not just destroying equipment, they're accessing our data systems." Sam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing life support. "They're downloading our files. Everything we know about human technology, other colonies, trade routes." Dan Cole appeared from a side corridor, his security team in full retreat. The former soldier's face was grim as he assessed the tactical situation. "Conventional weapons are useless. They adapt too quickly to anything sophisticated." "Then we stop being sophisticated," Sam replied, checking his rifle's ammunition. "I've been preparing for this." He led them toward the maintenance section, moving through routes that avoided the main corridors where the creatures were concentrating their assault. The paths he chose seemed random, but Sam had spent weeks learning every service tunnel and emergency passage in the colony. They reached his workshop to find it untouched. The creatures had focused their attack on areas they considered strategically important, ignoring the simple maintenance facility. Sam's preparations were exactly where he had left them. Manual override switches for critical systems, backup power cells that operated independently of the main grid, and weapons that required no computers or targeting systems. "This is your plan?" Dan asked, looking at the collection of simple tools and primitive weapons. "Fight biomechanical creatures with hammers and hunting rifles?" "Fight them with things they haven't studied," Sam corrected. "They've learned to counter every piece of advanced technology in this colony, but they don't understand the old ways." Through the workshop's small window, Sam could see the creatures spreading through the colony like an infection. They moved with perfect coordination, each group focusing on a specific objective while maintaining constant communication with the others. It was a textbook military operation, executed with mechanical precision. But Sam had noticed something the others missed. For all their technological sophistication, the creatures were following predictable patterns. They had studied the colony's defenses so thoroughly that they had developed rigid tactical doctrines. They expected certain responses to their attacks and had prepared counters for each anticipated move. What they hadn't prepared for was someone who refused to follow any doctrine at all. Sam picked up his rifle and checked the simple explosive charges he had placed throughout the colony's infrastructure. Not sophisticated demolitions that could be detected and disarmed, but crude devices that would bring down critical support structures through brute force. "Time to show these things what humans do when we're cornered," he said grimly. "We stop playing by the rules." Sam moved through the colony's service tunnels like a ghost, his decades of maintenance experience serving him in ways he had never imagined. While the creatures swarmed through the main corridors above, he used access routes that existed only in his memory and on hand-drawn maps that no computer system had ever recorded. The colony was dying around him. Through ventilation grates, he could see the aftermath of the creatures' systematic assault. Bodies lay scattered in the corridors, both alien and the few humans who had tried to fight. The sophisticated medical bay had been stripped of its technology, leaving the wounded to tend themselves with primitive first aid. But Sam was no longer thinking like a maintenance engineer. The knowledge that had made him effective at fixing broken systems now served a darker purpose. He understood the colony's infrastructure better than anyone, and he was going to use that knowledge to turn the entire facility into a weapon. His first target was the main atmospheric processing plant. The creatures had captured it intact, obviously planning to use it for their own purposes. Sam crawled through a service tunnel that brought him directly beneath the facility's main support column. The charges he had planted weeks earlier were still in place, simple explosives that relied on chemical reactions rather than electronic triggers. Sam set off the first blast manually, using a match and a length of fuse that his grandfather might have recognized. The explosion brought down half the atmospheric plant, crushing dozens of creatures beneath tons of twisted metal and concrete. The survivors scattered in confusion, their coordinated tactics disrupted by an attack they had never anticipated. Through the chaos, Sam heard something that chilled him to the bone. The creatures were communicating, but not in any language he recognized. The sounds were a mixture of electronic tones and organic calls, suggesting they truly were biomechanical hybrids. More importantly, they were adapting to his tactics in real time. By the time Sam reached his second target, the power distribution center, the creatures had figured out that someone was using the service tunnels. Groups of them began moving toward access points, trying to cut off his escape routes. But Sam had advantages they couldn't counter. He knew every pipe, cable, and ductwork in the facility, and he had spent weeks preparing fallback positions. The power center was heavily defended, with dozens of creatures working to maintain the electrical systems they needed for their own technology. Sam watched them through a concealed observation port, studying their behavior. They moved with mechanical precision. But there was something else, a hierarchy that suggested intelligence and organization beyond mere programming. One creature was clearly directing the others, its biomechanical form larger and more complex than the rest. When it gestured with appendages that seemed part claw and part precision tool, the others responded immediately. This was their commander, and Sam realized that taking it out might disrupt their entire operation. The hunting rifle would be useless at this range, and the creatures were too alert for him to get closer undetected. But Sam had other options. He had spent years working with high-pressure hydraulic systems, and he understood the devastating power of water under extreme pressure. Sam made his way to the facility's main water distribution system, a network of pipes that carried pressurized water throughout the colony. The creatures had ignored this system, apparently considering it irrelevant to their objectives. They had made a fatal mistake. Using his simple tools, Sam began modifying the pressure release valves on the main distribution line. He removed safety mechanisms and blocked pressure relief systems, creating a condition that would have horrified any safety engineer. The water pressure began building to dangerous levels, turning the entire pipe network into a potential weapon. When Sam finally opened the modified valve, the result was catastrophic. A jet of water moving at incredible pressure burst through the wall of the power center like a cannon shot. The stream was so powerful it cut through metal and concrete, and any creature caught in its path was simply torn apart. The biomechanical commander never saw the attack coming. One moment it was directing its forces, the next it was scattered across the room in fragments of metal and organic matter. The other creatures reacted with something that looked like panic, their coordinated movements dissolving into chaotic retreat. Sam didn't waste time celebrating. He moved to his next position, using routes that took him deeper into the colony's foundation levels. The creatures were learning, but they were also growing desperate. Their careful plans were falling apart, and they were beginning to make mistakes. The main communication array was Sam's third target, and by the time he reached it, the creatures had begun to anticipate his methods. They had posted guards at every obvious access point, and were actively hunting for him in the service tunnels. But Sam had one more advantage they couldn't predict. He was willing to go places that no sane person would venture. The colony's waste processing system was a nightmare of toxic chemicals and dangerous machinery that even Sam avoided when possible. But it also provided access to every major system in the facility, including the communication array. Sam pulled on an old-fashioned gas mask and descended into the chemical hell beneath the colony. The waste tunnels burned his eyes even through the mask, and the toxic vapors made breathing difficult despite his protection. But he pushed forward, driven by a grim determination that his alien colleagues had never understood. This was what separated humans from the more civilized species: the willingness to endure any hardship, survive any condition, and fight from any position. When Sam emerged beneath the communication array, he found it guarded by only a few creatures. They had correctly calculated that no rational being would approach through the waste system. But Sam Rivers had stopped being rational the moment these things killed his colleagues and threatened his home. The charges he set in the communication center were larger than the others, designed not just to destroy the equipment, but to bring down the entire structure. When they detonated, the explosion could be felt throughout the colony. The creatures' coordination network died with their communication hub, leaving individual groups isolated and confused. But Sam's most important target was still ahead. The main tunnel system that connected the colony to the deep mining shafts was the creatures' primary invasion route. They were using it to bring up reinforcements from whatever nest or hive they had established in the planet's depths. If Sam could collapse those tunnels, he could trap the creatures already in the colony and prevent more from reaching the surface. The demolition charges required for such a massive undertaking were beyond what Sam had been able to prepare secretly. Instead, he would have to use the colony's own mining equipment against itself. The industrial explosive charges used for excavation were stored in a heavily armored bunker, designed to withstand accidents. The creatures had captured it early in their assault, apparently recognizing its strategic importance. Sam knew that reaching the explosive storage would be a suicide mission. The area was crawling with creatures and they were now actively hunting for him. But as he prepared for what might be his final assault, Sam felt a strange sense of peace. This was what he had been built for, what 3 years of mockery and condescension had been preparing him for. The aliens had called him primitive, stubborn, and simple-minded. They had compared him to a honey badger as an insult, never understanding that they were describing exactly the kind of creature you needed when civilization collapsed and only raw determination mattered. Sam checked his rifle one last time and headed toward the explosive storage bunker. The colony's survival depended on one stubborn human's willingness to fight dirty, think simple, and never give up. It was time to show these biomechanical invaders what humanity looked like when backed into a corner. Sam emerged from the collapsed tunnel system 3 days after the explosion that should have killed him, looking like something that had crawled out of hell itself. His coveralls were torn and burned, his face was streaked with soot and dried blood, and his hands were raw from clawing through debris with nothing but determination and his grandfather's crowbar. The silence that greeted him as he limped toward the colony's main entrance was profound. No machinery hummed, no voices called out in multiple alien languages, no automated systems announced status updates. Mining Colony 7 looked like a graveyard, its buildings scarred by battle and its corridors empty of life. But as Sam approached the main airlock, faces began to appear at windows. Avian features pressed against reinforced glass, scalar snouts emerged from damaged doorways, and the synchronized movements of hive mind survivors became visible in the shadows. One by one, the colonists who had written him off as a primitive human began to understand what they were seeing. Sam Rivers had walked into the deepest part of the tunnel system with enough explosives to level a mountain. He had deliberately trapped himself with thousands of biomechanical creatures in a maze of collapsing passages and unstable rock formations. And somehow, impossibly, he had survived. Beth Adams was the first to reach him, her administrative composure completely abandoned as she ran across the damaged plaza. Behind her came Dan Cole, moving with the careful gait of someone nursing serious injuries but refusing to show weakness. The alien survivors followed more cautiously, their species' natural wariness overriding their curiosity. Sam, Beth gasped, stopping just short of touching him as if afraid he might disappear. How did you? We saw the seismic readings. The entire tunnel network collapsed. Sam set down his battered tool bag and wiped the worst of the grime from his face with an equally dirty sleeve. Took longer than I expected, he said simply. Those things were tougher than they looked. Dan Cole's military bearing couldn't hide his amazement. The biomechanical creatures, are they? Dead, Sam confirmed. All of them, at least all the ones that made it to the surface. Probably more down in their nest, but they're sealed off now. Won't be bothering anyone for a long time. Trill, the avian engineer who had spent 3 years mocking Sam's primitive methods, approached with her silver feathers dulled by dust and defeat. Her voice carried none of its usual condescension. The tunnel collapse should have killed everything down there, including you. How did you survive? Sam looked at her for a long moment, remembering every dismissive comment, every patronizing suggestion, every time she had implied that human methods were inferior to alien technology. I didn't try to survive, he said finally. I tried to win. The distinction seemed to puzzle the aliens, but Dan Cole understood immediately. You used the collapse as a weapon? The creatures were smart, Sam explained, accepting a bottle of water from Beth and drinking deeply before continuing. They had studied our technology, learned our tactics, prepared counters for everything we might throw at them. But they made one mistake. They assumed I would try to fight them and escape. Ridge, the scalar foreman, slithered closer on his belly, his usual arrogance replaced by something approaching respect. Instead, you trapped yourself with them deliberately. I trapped them with me, Sam corrected. There's a difference. They had numbers, coordination, and superior technology, but they had never faced someone who was willing to die to stop them. Over the next few hours, as the colony's survivors worked to restore basic systems, the full scope of Sam's underground campaign became clear. The biomechanical creatures had controlled the tunnel network for almost a year, establishing a staging area deep beneath the mining operation. They had been systematically studying the colony's defenses, preparing for an invasion that would have wiped out every living being on the surface. Sam had spent 3 days hunting them through collapsed tunnels and unstable caverns, using nothing but simple weapons and an intimate knowledge of underground survival. When his ammunition ran out, he used improvised explosives. When those were exhausted, he used mining tools as weapons. When the tools broke, he used rocks, debris, and his bare hands. The creatures had adapted to energy weapons and sophisticated technology, but they had no defense against someone who refused to follow any predictable pattern. Sam had fought like what he was, a stubborn, resourceful human who would rather die than give up. The thermal imaging from the rescue drones shows the entire nest complex was destroyed, Dan reported, studying data on one of the few functioning display units. Thousands of creatures, maybe tens of thousands. Their entire population center is gone. How did you know where to place the charges? Beth asked. The tunnel network was enormous. Sam pulled out a hand-drawn map, its surface stained with blood and tunnel grime. I followed the water, he said simply. The creatures needed fresh water, same as anything else. Their nest was built around an underground river system. Take out the main flow and the whole complex floods. The aliens studied the crude map with something approaching awe, while they had been relying on sophisticated scanning equipment and computer analysis. Sam had been using techniques that predated spaceflight. He had read the environment like a book written in stone and water, understanding the planet's geology in ways that no scanner could match. Trill spread her wings in a gesture of formal acknowledgement. The Avian Council will want to study your methods. Your approach to threat assessment could revolutionize our defensive doctrines. Your defensive doctrines are fine, Sam replied, shouldering his tool bag. You just need to remember that not every problem can be solved with better technology. Word of Sam's single-handed. Defense of Mining Colony 7 spread through the galactic communication networks with the speed that only truly extraordinary stories achieve. The account of one human engineer destroying an entire invasion force using primitive weapons and crude tactics became the subject of academic study, military analysis, and no small amount of legend-making. Within months, human advisors were being requested for frontier colonies throughout the galaxy. The species that had spent decades mocking human primitivism suddenly wanted to learn what they called adaptive defense, strategies and low-technology warfare. What they really wanted was to understand how a single human with basic tools could accomplish what their sophisticated military forces could. Not Sam Rivers, meanwhile, returned to his maintenance duties with characteristic stubbornness. He refused interviews, declined military promotions, and turned down lucrative consulting offers. He fixed what was broken, maintained what was working, and prepared for whatever might come next. The alien workers at Mining Colony 7 no longer called him Badger as an insult. Now the nickname carried a weight of respect that bordered on reverence. They had learned that honey badgers were not mocked for being primitive. They were feared for being unstoppable. When new personnel arrived at the colony, they were told the story of the human engineer who had saved them all. They were shown the sealed tunnel entrances where Sam had collapsed an entire underground civilization. They were reminded that sometimes the most advanced solution was to find someone willing to do whatever it took to protect what mattered. Sam himself never spoke of those 3 days underground. When pressed for details, he would only say that he had done what needed doing. But sometimes, late at night when the colony was quiet, he would stand at the observation deck and look down at the sealed tunnels. His hands would unconsciously tighten around whatever tool he was carrying, and his eyes would hold the hard gleam of someone who had looked into the abyss and refused to blink first. The galaxy had learned an important lesson from Mining Colony 7. Never underestimate a species that has survived by being too stubborn to quit, and never ever mock the honey badger, because when everything else fails, that angry little creature might be the only thing standing between civilization and the dark.